As Minister for Tourism and Heritage since the election of a Conservative-led coalition government in 2010, John Penrose is one of the longest-serving government ministers to hold the brief including the hospitality industry, and the first to have the tourism brief as the primary focus of his role. Addressing the inaugural British Hospitality Association summit earlier this year, Penrose said that this government gets it, and said it was working to reduce red tape and regulation. However, after the event, BHA Chief Executive Ufi Ibrahim said there was a concern the present government is not listening to the country's wealth creators, and there was a lot of government talk, but very little action. In an exclusive interview for BigHospitality, I asked the Minister if he thought that was a fair criticism.
I was going to say, slightly surprised by that, because that's not something that Ufi's said to me personally at all. And we've got a government tourism strategy, which Ufi and others have welcomed very strongly. I mean, I think it's the first time we've had one of those for a very, very long time. That was published about 18, 20 months ago. And we made a reasonable degree of progress and process towards getting on with the job. So, and I think I would share Ufi's frustration that there's a heck of a lot more to do, but I would contest the notion that there's not quite a lot been done already. There has been, but she's absolutely right, there's always more to do.
During the summit, a lot of people were saying it's fantastic that we have such a good spokesperson in yourself, but that perhaps this brief would be better in the business department, that it's a shame the fifth biggest employer hasn't got a seat around the cabinet table, a voice at cabinet. One of the country's biggest employers, really in growth, but perhaps hasn't got the voice it deserves.
And I think that's historically been one of the big problems for the visitor economy in its widest sense, that other industries, because they've had a smaller number of big employers, they've had more political clout, they get more airtime, not just in Whitehall, but also in the press as well.
Penrose claimed both the Prime Minister and Chancellor had wanted to write the foreword for the tourism summit, along with the Cabinet Minister on the industry side and Jeremy Hunt. That, he said, gave the UK an enviable position of government key hitters supporting hospitality.
And it's really important because this job requires a huge amount of cooperation and coordination across Whitehall, because you can't do the visitor economy without thinking about transportation links, without thinking about visas, without thinking about all sorts of other stuff. So you've got to go and work with other government departments. If you try and do it just in your own department, it doesn't matter if that department is DCMS or BIS or anyone else, you're always going to have to work across departments. So I'm less fussed about which department it sits in, providing we've got the heavyweight senior backing. And I think I've got sort of three of the best around the cabinet table. It's certainly an awful lot more than we've had in the past.
I know, tough question for you on tax, because a lot of the industry are, I imagine, lobbying you quite regularly on VAT in particular.
Yeah.
I noticed that it wasn't something you mentioned in your address. Obviously, there's a difficulty with money and being able to afford tax cuts and things like this. I think the industry recognises that, but are you sympathetic to their argument that things like VAT specifically, the beer tax, are making them directly uncompetitive when it comes to their European counterparts? Are you sympathetic to that argument?
Well, I mean, in general, I'm a former businessman and a low tax Tory, so I think that in principle, you want to try and, wherever you possibly can, reduce burdens on business so they can create more jobs and create more wealth and get the economy moving again. The question, as you rightly said, is can this be afforded, and how do you do that in a way which doesn't undermine our efforts to bring the deficit under control? And you're absolutely right. At the moment, poor George Osborne's team are really caught between a rock and a hard place because there is no money to coin the phrase.
I suppose the question is not your willingness, but
can we do it?
The fact is VAT in particular, where there is such a big disparity with so many of the European. Is that still a long-term ambition for a Conservative government?
Well, I think that in the short term, it's going to be very hard to do very much on VAT, as I think the industry understands anyway. The thing which I think we as an industry are grappling with here is that the Treasury gets a regular stream of proposals from all the different sectors in the economy, promising them jam tomorrow if they'll only cut taxes today. And of course, all these different proposals are incredibly professionally produced and are incredibly compelling. But if you're in the Treasury, you get quite cynical about these things because they're always promising jam tomorrow. And I think that one of the things that the industry has to do is to try and work out how it can show that its proposal is different, and it's got to convince the folk at the Treasury, who, as I said, are wearily cynical because they see an awful lot of these, that while the mines and the farmers and the everybody else may be promising the same things, the hospitality industry is better at producing it and better at delivering it. That's a tough ask. I mean, I think everybody in the industry understands that's a tough ask, but that's the kind of credibility that we've got to establish if we're going to get anywhere with this.
One point highlighted at the BHA summit was the need for the industry to lobby the government as one voice. Penrose agreed, but said although his dealings with various industry bodies was complicated, lobbying Whitehall shouldn't be their only aim, and organisation consolidation might not be the answer.
It would be marginally helpful and convenient for me or my successors to have a smaller number of people to talk to, but it's not essential. And I think the really crucial test ought to be what's going to give the industry the most clout, the most heft. So you can have quite a few different representative organisations if they are all agreeing and speaking with one voice and hanging together and speaking together.
Penrose advised the industry to make its role in job creation the key focus of its message to government. He said the biggest and nicest surprise to him since taking the role had been the excitement and dynamism in the industry. And the biggest frustration?
I think we've got an awfully long way to go to raise our game in terms of presenting all the wonderful places in Britain outside London. London is absolutely superb, but there's all this other stuff too, and we just haven't managed to persuade the rest of the planet about all this other stuff being just as good in a different way. That's one of the things we've really got to address.
Every industry would like a minister to be in the brief for a long amount of time. I mean, there's a lot of talk about reshuffles and changes. Presumably you are campaigning to stay in this brief and to finish the job you started.
I'm really enjoying this job. I think, as I said, it's a great industry. I represent a seaside town anyway, so it's from my point of view personally, it's a great fit. Any decisions about who gets moved where will be well above my pay grade. I will be delighted if I'm allowed to carry on doing this because it's one of the best jobs in Whitehall.
John, thank you so much for your time. Cheers.